Jamaica was once the broke cousin of the Caribbean. Now, it's closing in on Trinidad's oil-rich crown faster than anyone expected. In this video, we are going to look at how Jamaica, long burdened by IMF debt and austerity, is suddenly competing with Trinidad and Tobago, the traditional heavyweight of Caribbean wealth. We'll explore how Trinidad built prosperity on oil and natural gas, only to suffer when global prices crashed. Then we'll uncover Jamaica's astonishing rebound, tourism's massive growth, the billion-dollar BPO boom, remittances pouring in from the diaspora, and its steady turnaround from debt disaster. Finally, we'll compare GDP totals, per capita wealth, and future risks to ask, is Jamaica secretly building a more resilient economy than Trinidad? The contrast was so sharp that it seemed unfair to compare them. Trinidad was rich, Jamaica was broke. Trinidad exported liquefied natural gas. Jamaica imported fuel at high cost. Trinidad built petrochemical plants. Jamaica begged for IMF bailouts. In fact, there was a period when Trinidad and Tobago's economy was almost double the size of Jamaica's, despite having less than half the population. But here's the twist. In 2025, that gap is no longer what it used to be. Jamaica's economy today stands at about $20 billion. Trinidad and Tobago's is around $28 billion. The difference remains, yes, but it is the smallest in decades. A story that once seemed predictable is suddenly turning into a race. And people across the Caribbean are asking, how did Jamaica, the nation once drowning in debt, come so close to matching Trinidad, the longtime economic heavyweight? To answer that, we need to step back into Trinidad's oil fields, into Jamaica's debt spiral, and into the choices both nations made over the last 50 years. Trinidad's wealth story begins in black gold. Oil was discovered there in the late 1800s, but it was the 20th century that transformed it into a powerhouse. By the 1970s, when oil prices soared globally due to the OPEC crisis, Trinidad cashed in. The government's coffers overflowed. Infrastructure projects boomed. Highways, schools, and cultural institutions were built at a speed rarely seen in the Caribbean. In the 1990s, natural gas became king. With vast offshore reserves, Trinidad invested heavily in liquefied natural gas, LNG, facilities. By the early 2000s, the country was among the world's leading LNG exporters. LNG tankers left Point Fortin for markets across the globe, particularly the United States. This energy boom did more than create jobs. It gave the government enormous fiscal space. Education was subsidized, healthcare was free, fuel was cheap, and social programs were plentiful. Citizens enjoyed a standard of living envied across the region. GDP per capita reached levels that placed Trinidad among the top 50 nations in the world, far ahead of its Caribbean neighbors. Energy wealth also birthed an industrial base. Petrochemical plants churn out ammonia and methanol for export, giving Trinidad a diversified, but still energy-dependent portfolio. Industrial estates in Point Lisas symbolized modernity and progress. For a small island nation of just 1.4 million people, this was remarkable. Yet, beneath the prosperity was a hidden vulnerability. Oil and gas prices are among the most volatile commodities in the world. When prices are high, energy exporters soar. When they crash, they collapse. For Trinidad, this meant riding a roller coaster economy. The crash of 2014 was a rude awakening. Oil prices fell from over $100 a barrel to below $50. Gas prices also slumped. Overnight, government surpluses turned into deficits. Projects were delayed, revenues evaporated, and growth stalled. Between 2014 and 2024, Trinidad's economy contracted on average by 1.2% annually. Citizens felt the squeeze as unemployment rose and the government tightened belts. The once flashy prosperity no longer looked invincible. Energy had built wealth, yes, but it also tied Trinidad's fate to forces it could not control: global demand, OPEC decisions, U.S. shale gas production, and the slow but steady march toward renewable energy. Now, let's look at Jamaica. If Trinidad was the student who seemed destined for success, Jamaica was the one always on academic probation, struggling to make ends meet. In the 1970s and 1980s, Jamaica turned to borrowing to finance development projects. Global interest rates rose, exports faltered, and debt ballooned. By the 1990s, the debt-to-GDP ratio was staggering. By 2013, it peaked at 146%. Imagine earning $100 a year, but owing $146 and paying interest on top of that. Bankruptcy seemed inevitable. The International Monetary Fund stepped in repeatedly with bailouts. But IMF money never came free. Jamaica was required to impose austerity measures, higher taxes, public wage freezes, spending cuts, and strict fiscal discipline. For ordinary Jamaicans, these policies were painful. Nurses and teachers went years without raises. Pensions stretched thin. Schools and hospitals operated under pressure. Families struggled as inflation ate into wages. Yet through the hardship, Jamaica endured. And slowly, the sacrifices began to show results. Debt began to fall. By 2024, it had dropped to about 70% of GDP, still high, but half of what it once was. Investor confidence returned. The Jamaican dollar, once notorious for rapid depreciation, became more stable. Inflation slowed. Stability, though costly, gave Jamaica breathing space it hadn't had in decades. But discipline alone doesn't grow an economy. What set Jamaica apart was its commitment to diversification. Unlike Trinidad, which leaned almost entirely on energy, Jamaica spread its bets across multiple industries. Tourism became the star. By 2024, tourism contributed over 30% of GDP. Resorts line Montego Bay, Ocho Rios, and Negril. Cruise ships docked weekly. Millions of visitors arrived annually, spending money not only in hotels, but in restaurants, taxis, craft markets, and farms supplying produce. Tourism became the backbone of the economy, employing hundreds of thousands and sustaining countless small businesses. Then came business process outsourcing, BPO. Quietly but steadily, call centers, IT support services, and back-office operations sprouted across the island. With over 44,000 employees, Jamaica's BPO sector grew into a billion-dollar industry. Its English-speaking workforce and cultural proximity to North America made it a natural hub for outsourcing. For many young Jamaicans, BPO provided stable jobs in a modern sector. Mining, though smaller than in its heyday, remained relevant. Bauxite and alumina exports continued to contribute to foreign exchange. Agriculture, too, played a supporting role, particularly for domestic consumption and small-scale exports like coffee, rum, and spices. And then there were remittances. Jamaicans abroad, from New York to London to Toronto, sent back billions annually, over $3 billion in 2023 alone. These funds built houses, paid school fees, and sustained entire rural communities. For many families, remittances were the difference between survival and collapse. No single sector made Jamaica rich, but together they made it resilient. When tourism dipped, remittances held steady. When mining slowed, BPO picked up. It was a balance Trinidad never developed. So what does this rivalry look like on the ground? In Trinidad, average GDP per capita is around $19,000. In Jamaica, it's about $7,000. On paper, Trinidadians are far wealthier. Minimum wage in Trinidad is $20 TD per hour, about $118 US a week. In Jamaica, the weekly minimum wage is 16,000 JMD, roughly $100 US. At the low end, the gap isn't massive. But Trinidad's higher-paying energy and industrial job skew averages upward. Middle-class Trinidadians often own cars, live in suburban homes, and enjoy subsidized utilities. Jamaicans, by contrast, often live paycheck to paycheck, with fewer high-paying jobs available outside tourism and BPO. Yet for Jamaicans, the stability of recent years is transformative. Inflation is lower. The Jamaican dollar is more predictable. Jobs may not pay as much, but they are consistent. Families can plan for school, save modestly, and invest in small businesses. For a country once trapped in crisis, this stability feels like progress. And so, in 2025, we see the scoreboard. Jamaica, $20 billion GDP. Trinidad and Tobago, $28 billion. A gap remains, but it is narrower than it has been in decades. Trinidad still holds the advantage in per capita wealth. Its smaller population and energy-driven exports means citizens remain richer on average. But Jamaica is growing faster. Its diversified base, combined with debt discipline, makes it less vulnerable to global shocks. The race is on, and for the first time in decades, it's not clear who will dominate the future. When we left off, Jamaica had narrowed the GDP gap with Trinidad and Tobago to its smallest point in decades, $20 billion versus $28 billion. For the first time, the two Caribbean giants looked like they were competing on relatively even ground. But numbers alone don't tell the full story. To understand where this rivalry is headed, we need to unpack the mathematics, the risks, and the possible futures that lie ahead. Let's start with population, because this is where the comparison gets tricky. Trinidad and Tobago has about 1.4 million people. Jamaica has double that, around 2.8 million. That means even if the two countries had the exact same GDP, Trinidadians would still be twice as rich on average. GDP per capita in Trinidad is roughly $19,000. In Jamaica, it's closer to $7,000. For Jamaica to match Trinidad on a per-person basis, its economy would need to grow to about $54 billion, almost triple its current size. That's not happening overnight. It would require decades of sustained high growth. Still, the fact that Jamaica has narrowed the total GDP gap so dramatically is a sign of how far it's come. Right now, Jamaica grows at around 2 to 3% annually. Trinidad, by contrast, struggles to hit 2%, averaging closer to 1.6% in recent years. That difference, small as it seems, compounds over time. If Jamaica sustains its faster growth, the total GDP gap will keep narrowing. But per capita? That's a steeper climb. Unless Jamaica turbocharges its economy, doubling tourism, expanding BPO, and unlocking new industries, it will take decades to catch Trinidad's per-person wealth. Let's weigh the strengths of each economy. Trinidad's strength is obvious: energy, oil, gas, ammonia, methanol, high-value exports that bring in billions. The sector creates high-paying jobs and fuels tax revenue that supports schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. For a small country, that's powerful. But the weakness is dependence. Over 80% of exports come from energy. When oil and gas prices collapse, so does government revenue. Trinidad has not diversified enough, and global trends are moving toward renewable energy. If demand for fossil fuels declines significantly over the next 20 years, Trinidad risks losing its golden goose. Jamaica's strength is diversification. Tourism, BPO, mining, agriculture, and remittances create a balanced mix. No single sector dominates. If one stumbles, others pick up the slack. That resilience is something Trinidad envies. The weakness? Wages. Many Jamaican jobs are low-paying, particularly in tourism and call centers. Growth is steady, but inequality remains high, and many Jamaicans feel left behind. Infrastructure, while improving, still lags behind Trinidad's industrial base. So, where does this rivalry go from here? Let's imagine three possible futures. 1. The oil collapse scenario. If global oil prices plunge again, as they did in 2014, Trinidad will feel the pain immediately. Energy revenues could dry up, deficits could rise, and unemployment could spike. Jamaica, by contrast, will be less affected. Tourism might even grow as travelers seek affordable destinations. In this scenario, Jamaica keeps climbing while Trinidad stalls. 2. The tourism boom scenario. If Jamaica doubles tourism over the next decade, GDP could skyrocket. Already, over 4 million visitors come each year. Imagine if that number hits 8 million, supported by new resorts, expanded airports, and stronger marketing. The ripple effects would touch nearly every sector of the Jamaican economy. This scenario could push Jamaica much closer to Trinidad in total GDP. 3. The energy transition scenario. As the world shifts toward renewables, Trinidad's reliance on oil and gas could become a liability. LNG exports may decline as countries invest in solar, wind, and hydrogen. Unless Trinidad reinvents itself, expanding into tech, finance, or tourism, it could see long-term stagnation. Jamaica, already diversified, would benefit from being less tied to a fading industry. This rivalry isn't just about money, it's about leadership. For years, Trinidad has punched above its weight in CARICOM, using its energy wealth to drive policy and host major regional institutions. Jamaica, while larger in population, was seen as the cultural leader, exporting music, sports, and global influence, but not the economic one. That's changing. Jamaica's stronger finances and diversified economy are giving it more weight in regional negotiations. Investors are looking at Kingston as a hub for business services. Diaspora remittances connect Jamaica directly to North America and Europe. If the trajectory continues, Jamaica could rival Trinidad not just in GDP, but in influence. For ordinary citizens, what matters most is how this rivalry translates into daily life. In Trinidad, many enjoy higher salaries, better infrastructure, and a tradition of subsidized services. But the roller coaster of energy prices creates uncertainty. Families worry about layoffs when global prices crash. Young people increasingly talk about migrating for stability. In Jamaica, salaries are lower, but the economy feels steadier. Jobs in tourism and BPO may not make anyone rich, but they provide consistency. Families can plan. Inflation is lower. The Jamaican dollar, while weaker than the US dollar, is more predictable than it used to be. Stability is the new prosperity. Could Jamaica overtake? Here's the million-dollar question. Will Jamaica ever overtake Trinidad? In raw GDP, it's possible. If Jamaica keeps growing faster, the total size of its economy could match or surpass Trinidad's in the next 2 decades. In per capita terms, however, the climb is far steeper. Matching Trinidad's $19,000 per person would take Jamaica tripling its economy, a journey of at least 30 years, even at strong growth rates. But here's the key insight. Jamaica doesn't have to be richer per person to win the long game. What it has built is resilience. What it has created is balance. And in a region where hurricanes, pandemics, and global shocks can upend entire economies overnight, resilience may prove more valuable than raw wealth. This rivalry offers lessons for the wider Caribbean. Trinidad shows the power and peril of resource wealth. Oil and gas can catapult a small nation into prosperity, but they can also create dependence and fragility. Jamaica shows the value of diversification. It may not make you instantly rich, but makes you steady. It turns vulnerability into balance. For other Caribbean nations, Barbados, Guyana, St. Lucia, the lesson is clear: balance is survival. Beyond economics, this story carries symbolism. For decades, Jamaicans lived with the stigma of being the broke cousin in the Caribbean family. Now, after years of sacrifice, discipline, and reinvention, the island is rewriting its story. It's about more than numbers, it's about dignity. About showing that a country can fall into crisis, endure austerity, and still rise stronger. Trinidad, meanwhile, must confront its own lesson. Wealth alone is not enough. Without reinvention, the energy crown may slip. And if it does, Jamaica will be waiting. So, is Jamaica secretly getting richer than Trinidad and Tobago? Not yet. Not today and not tomorrow. Trinidadians still enjoy higher per capita wealth. The gap remains. Jamaica's rise against Trinidad and Tobago isn't just about closing GDP numbers. It's about rewriting a regional narrative. Trinidad's energy wealth once made it untouchable, but its dependence on oil and gas leaves it vulnerable. Jamaica, by contrast, built resilience through diversification, debt discipline, and diaspora strength. While Trinidadians remain richer per person, Jamaica's economy is more balanced and potentially more future-proof. The real lesson for the Caribbean? Wealth is fragile, but resilience endures. Jamaica's climb proves that steady growth can outlast volatility. If you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories shaping our world.